For decades, Gene Simmons has lived life larger than anyone else. A rock icon, a fire-breathing performer, and a man who built an empire on attitude, ambition, and sheer willpower. But what just came out about him left even his most loyal fans in utter disbelief. In early October 2025, shocking reports emerged from Malibu, California. Gene Simmons, the legendary frontman of Kiss, had been involved in a serious car crash. His black SUV had veered across multiple lanes on the Pacific Coast Highway before colliding with a parked vehicle. Witnesses say the impact was violent, and for a terrifying moment, everyone feared the worst. Authorities quickly revealed that Gene may have fainted or suffered a medical emergency moments before the accident. He was rushed to the hospital, and the world held its breath. Within hours, social media exploded, fans around the globe posting prayers, memories, and messages of support. For a man who had always seemed untouchable, it was a chilling reminder that even legends can fall. But then came the twist that no one expected. Gene broke his silence with humor. Calling it a little fender bender, he laughed off the incident, saying he was simply a terrible driver. It was classic Simmons, defiant, unbothered, and strong as ever. Still, behind that rock-solid exterior, those close to him say the scare shook his family deeply. For Shannon Tweed and their children, this wasn't just another headline, it was a wake-up call. The demon of rock had come face to face with his own mortality. The morning of October 7th, 2025, started like any other along California's scenic Pacific Coast Highway. Calm ocean breeze, early sun rising, and the hum of cars along the winding road. But for Gene Simmons, that ordinary morning would turn into a moment that reminded the entire world just how fragile life can be. Around 9:15 a.m., witnesses reported seeing a black SUV swerving unexpectedly near the Malibu cliffs. Within seconds, it crossed multiple lanes and collided with a parked vehicle on the shoulder. The impact was loud enough to draw nearby residents out of their homes. For a man who had spent half a century performing with explosions and pyrotechnics, this was the first time the real world provided the crash. When bystanders rushed to the scene, they found Gene slumped over the steering wheel, conscious but dazed. According to initial police reports, he may have lost consciousness before the collision, possibly due to a sudden medical issue. The airbags had deployed, and the front end of the car was heavily damaged, but miraculously, Gene was alive. Paramedics arrived quickly and transported him to a local hospital in Santa Monica. For hours, fans and reporters waited anxiously outside, desperate for updates. Social media flooded with hashtags, Pray for Gene Simmons and Stay Strong Demon, as the rock community collectively held its breath. The world knows Gene Simmons as the unbreakable demon of Kiss, a man who breathes fire, spits blood, and struts across stages like an immortal. But as news spread that he had fainted behind the wheel, something shifted. The mask came off, and the world saw the man behind the legend. Inside the hospital, Shannon Tweed, his wife of over a decade and partner of more than 40 years, rushed to his side with their children, Nick and Sophie. Sources close to the family say Shannon was visibly shaken, telling friends, "He's never been the type to slow down." But this scared all of us. Doctors performed a full battery of tests, ruling out a heart attack but noting dehydration and a recent change in medication as possible causes. Gene had been pushing himself hard. Long studio sessions, public appearances, and business travel, despite his age. Even for someone with Simmons's energy, the pace had caught up. After several tense hours, Gene was released and escorted home. Within a day, the man who had cheated death on the highway was back online, tweeting humor instead of fear. "Just a fender bender," he wrote. "I'm fine, but apparently I'm a terrible driver. Thanks for the concern, everyone. It was vintage Gene, unshaken, unfiltered, and full of bravado." But those who know him best said the joke hid something deeper, a quiet realization that time was catching up to him. Rock critics and fans alike began reflecting on what Gene represents: the last of a generation of larger-than-life performers who built their legacy with sweat, fire, and absolute confidence. Seeing him vulnerable, hospitalized, fragile, human, hit people harder than expected. One fan commented online, You grow up thinking these rock gods are invincible. Seeing Gene in a hospital bed makes you realize they're mortal, just like the rest of us. As the dust settled, Shannon and the kids made one thing clear. Gene's health would now take priority over everything else. No tour, no deal, no appearance was more important than the man they loved. In a world that worshipped his strength, this moment of weakness made Gene Simmons more real than ever. The crash may have been minor in physical damage, but emotionally, it shook the foundation of the Kiss empire. For the first time in his career, Gene wasn't thinking about records, fame, or business. He was thinking about life and how quickly it can change. After the Malibu crash, Gene Simmons' mansion grew quieter than anyone could remember. For decades, the walls had echoed with rehearsals, phone calls, and the constant rhythm of a man who didn't know the meaning of rest. But now, for the first time in years, silence filled the halls. Doctors ordered complete rest. No interviews, no long flights, no rehearsals. For Gene, that felt like a punishment worse than the crash itself. The demon of Kiss had always thrived on chaos. But now the chaos had been replaced by calm, and that calm forced him to face something he had long ignored: his age, his health, and his mortality. Shannon Tweed stood guard like a soldier. Friends described her as fierce in her care. She checked every medication, scheduled every appointment, and even banned him from checking business emails. "You've been the demon long enough," she told him. "Now, you're my patient." At first, Gene brushed it off with jokes. He'd tell visitors, "Shannon's the real boss of Kiss now," followed by that familiar, mischievous grin. But late at night, when the house was still, he'd sit in the home studio surrounded by gold records and old photos. And that's when the mask slipped. He had lived a life of extremes: fame, fortune, controversy, and constant motion. From his humble beginnings as Chaim Witz, the poor Israeli boy raised by a Holocaust survivor mother, to becoming one of the richest and most recognizable rock stars in the world, Gene had always believed that slowing down meant fading away. But the crash changed that. It wasn't the near-death experience itself that haunted him. It was the thought that, had things gone differently, he might have left his wife and children without a goodbye. Friends later revealed that Gene began writing letters, one to Shannon, one to Nick, and one to Sophie. They weren't business instructions or will updates. They were emotional, deeply personal notes that expressed love, gratitude, and regret. One line reportedly read, "I built a kingdom out of sound and fire, but it's you three who made me a man." For a man known for arrogance and bravado, it was an uncharacteristic show of vulnerability. But those close to him say the letters symbolize something larger, a man finally confronting the limits of his power. During recovery, Gene's son Nick Simmons stayed nearby, taking on more family responsibilities. He later told a close friend, "Dad has always been the strongest person I know." Seeing him vulnerable made me realize that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting up differently. Meanwhile, media outlets speculated endlessly. Rumors swirled online that Gene's health was far worse than reported, that Kiss was done for good, or that Simmons had secretly suffered a mini-stroke. Shannon dismissed it all, stating publicly, "Gene's fine. He just needs rest and perspective, something he hasn't had in 50 years. But behind the scenes, even she admitted the scare had changed him. He started meditating, walking in the garden instead of staying up all night working. He'd sit quietly with a cup of tea, not the image of a rock god, but of a husband and father rediscovering peace. The transformation stunned those who knew him. A man who had once measured success in ticket sales and merchandise now began talking about legacy, memory, and family. During one conversation with a close friend, Gene said, "It's funny. You spend your whole life trying to be immortal. But the only immortality that matters is how the people you love remember you." The public didn't know this side of Gene Simmons, the reflective, almost philosophical man who traded ego for honesty. But soon, the world would. Because as he recovered, Gene made a decision that would shock everyone, including his bandmates. He wasn't just going to step away for a while. He was going to tell the truth about his health, his regrets, and the cost of becoming the demon. And when he finally spoke, the rock world wouldn't know how to react. When Gene Simmons finally broke his silence, the world expected a press statement, maybe a brief apology, a reassurance to fans, and then business as usual. But what they got was something no one saw coming. In a dimly lit room at his Beverly Hills mansion, Gene sat down with a small documentary crew to record what he called a personal message to my fans, and maybe to myself. What followed was one of the most emotional and revealing interviews of his entire career. For nearly an hour, the rock legend spoke not as the demon, not as the multimillionaire entrepreneur, but as Gene Klein, the boy from Haifa, Israel, who had once dreamed of changing his mother's life. He began softly, his gravelly voice carrying a rare hint of vulnerability. "You know, people think I'm made of steel," he said, "that I can breathe fire and live forever. But the truth is, steel rusts. And I realized recently that I'm not invincible." He paused, looked down at his hands, the same hands that had held a bass guitar on stage for 5 decades, and sighed. "I've spent my whole life running from the boy who was afraid of being poor. That's why I worked nonstop. Why I built Kiss into more than a band, into a business, a brand, a legacy. But what I didn't realize was that somewhere along the way, I stopped living for myself and started living for the legend." That confession struck deep. Fans who had idolized Simmons for his confidence and ego suddenly saw a man stripped of his armor. He spoke of his mother, Flora Klein, who had survived the Holocaust, and how her strength became his obsession with success. "My mother went through hell and came out smiling," he said. "I thought if I could give her everything, maybe I could erase her pain. But pain doesn't work like that. You can't buy peace. You have to earn it." At one point, the interviewer asked if he feared death. Gene smiled, that same crooked grin that had sold millions of posters, and replied, "No, I fear regret more than death. I fear not saying what matters while I still can." He then revealed something that left even his closest fans stunned. Gene had written a private memoir, one not meant for publication, titled Before the Music Stops. It was a collection of his most personal thoughts, confessions, apologies, and lessons. In it, he addressed former lovers, old friends, and even bandmates he'd clashed with over the years. "I wrote it because I wanted my kids to know the truth. Not the headlines, not the myth. Just me." For longtime fans, this moment was almost surreal. The same man who had once declared himself the ultimate rock god was now speaking about humility, legacy, and love. Within days, clips from the interview spread like wildfire. YouTube, X, Twitter, and Instagram flooded with the hashtag #GeneSimmonsTruth. Fans shared stories of how Kiss had changed their lives, but more importantly, they shared how Gene's honesty had moved them to tears. One viral comment read, "He's been breathing fire on stage for 50 years. Now he's breathing truth, and it's even more powerful." For the first time in decades, Gene Simmons wasn't the villain, the loudmouth, or the businessman. He was simply human, flawed, reflective, and grateful. As the interview wrapped up, Gene looked directly into the camera. His words would echo across the internet for weeks. "I've made a fortune, I've seen the world, and I've lived the dream. But none of it means anything without the people who love you when the lights go out. So to Shannon, to Nick, to Sophie, and to every fan who's ever put on the makeup. Thank you. You gave me everything, and I finally see it." The room fell silent. The man who had spent a lifetime performing had, at last, taken off the mask, literally and figuratively, but the story wasn't over. What happened next would take the music world by storm, because just days after the interview, Gene Simmons made a decision that stunned both his family and his fans. He wasn't just confessing, he was changing everything. In the days following Gene Simmons's emotional confession, the world waited for what would come next. Fans speculated that Kiss would announce another tour, or perhaps Gene would return to the stage, rejuvenated by his brush with mortality. After all, this was the man who had sworn he'd never retire, that he'd rock till he dropped. But then came the announcement that left millions speechless. At a small press event in Los Angeles, Gene Simmons stood before a handful of journalists, dressed not in leather or platform boots but in a simple black suit. His trademark sunglasses were gone, revealing tired yet peaceful eyes. He approached the microphone, cleared his throat, and said words no one ever expected to hear from him. "For 50 years, I've lived as the demon. Today, I'm ready to be Gene." The room went silent. Cameras clicked, pens froze. He continued, his voice steady and full of conviction. "This isn't about stepping away from music. It's about stepping into life. I've given everything to the stage. Now it's time to give everything to my family." With that, Gene Simmons, the fire-breathing icon of KISS, the man who turned rebellion into a business empire, announced his retirement from touring. He explained that while KISS would continue as a brand, he personally would no longer perform live. Instead, he planned to dedicate his time to family, philanthropy, and his private passion, teaching young musicians about the realities of the business. The decision wasn't impulsive. According to close friends, the Malibu crash had forced him to reevaluate what really mattered. During his recovery, he realized that he had spent more time performing for strangers than sitting down for dinner with his own children. "Nick and Sophie are grown," he said softly. "But there's still time to be a better father and a better husband. Shannon has stood by me through everything. It's time I stood by her." His wife, Shannon Tweed, standing quietly off stage, wiped away tears as Gene spoke. Later, she told reporters, "He's been the world's rock star for long enough. Now he gets to just be mine." The reaction across the world was immediate and emotional. Fans flooded social media with tributes, thanking Gene for decades of unforgettable music. Some expressed heartbreak, others admiration. One message captured the sentiment perfectly. He taught us that being loud doesn't mean being heartless. The demon had a soul all along. In the weeks that followed, Gene began auctioning off select memorabilia, guitars, stage costumes, and handwritten lyrics, with proceeds going to charities supporting children's education and Holocaust survivors. He said it was his way of closing the circle, giving back to the world that had given him everything. And though his stage days were over, Gene didn't disappear. Instead, he surprised everyone by launching a small foundation, the Simmons Legacy Project, dedicated to inspiring young artists to dream big without losing their values. "I want to teach them what no one taught me," he said. "That success means nothing if you lose yourself chasing it." In private moments, friends described him as calmer, even joyful. The once relentless businessman now spent afternoons in his garden, painting or strumming an acoustic guitar. His daughter Sophie once joked, "It's weird seeing Dad without the makeup, but it's nice seeing him smile for no reason." In one of his final interviews, Gene was asked if he missed the roar of the crowd. He paused for a moment, smiled, and said, "I'll always miss it. But you know what I don't miss? The noise. For the first time in my life, I can hear my own heartbeat, and it's enough." As the camera faded out, the man who had defined excess, ego, and showmanship walked away quietly. No fireworks, no pyrotechnics, no bass solo. Just Gene Simmons, husband, father, survivor, finally at peace with the man behind the mask. And so, the demon didn't die. He simply learned to rest.